Hey everyone, welcome back to my channel. In today's episode, we're going to explore how to use maps for an inventory system in Unreal Engine using blueprints. We'll dive into setting up a data structure for items and using the item structure as a key with the integer to keep track of the quantity in our inventory. Before we get started, make sure to hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure you turn on notifications so you don't miss any future episodes. Before we dive into creating our inventory system, let's take a moment to understand what maps are and why they're useful in Unreal Engine. Maps, also known as dictionaries or associative arrays in other programming languages, are a collection of key value pairs. Each key is unique and associated with a corresponding value. The real power of maps lie in their ability to provide constant time lookups, insertions, and deletions, making them incredibly efficient for managing large data sets. One of the key components that make maps so efficient is the use of a hash function. A hash function is a mathematical algorithm that takes a key as input and generates a fixed size output known as a hash value or hash code. This hash value is then used to determine the index or position in the underlying data structure, allowing for quick access to the corresponding value. A well designed hash function ensures that different keys produce unique hash values, minimizing the likelihood of collisions and resulting in efficient and stable data structure. In the context of an inventory system, we'll be using a map to store our items and their quantities. This allows us to quickly access, add, or remove items from our inventory, all while keeping the data organized and easy to manage. Additionally, maps can be easily serialized, making them a great choice for saving and loading game data, which we'll tackle in a future episode. Now that we have a better understanding of what maps are, their benefits in inventory systems, and the importance of a good hash function, let's move on to creating our inventory system and see how maps can make this extremely simple yet efficient. So to begin with here, I've got a couple widgets that we're going to use to display our items in a little inventory window. I'm not going to go into a lot of detail on these, but the first one is just going to be the simple window here that will populate with a scroll view here with list items. And this list item is going to be this button. It's a canvas wrapped in a button with a couple of text blocks here. These text blocks will set to variable or will bind to functions here. I'm going to remove that for now so we can create it. We'll bind these to functions. The first will be the item name and then the amount of items in this inventory that are of that same item type. So we'll set this up as we go. If you need to pause and create these, go ahead if you want to keep up. The next thing I want to do is I'm going to add a structure, and this is going to be my item structure. Inside here is going to be all the attributes for our item. The first one I want to do is name. One thing to note about maps in Unreal Engine is we can't map a text. If we need to map something that's a text, it actually has to be converted to a string or name. So it's kind of better to just go ahead and use a string or name in here. So I'm going to use name for this. I'm also going to add a couple variables that will just be integers. And I'm not going to get too complicated with this. So I'm going to do that, a strength, and maybe a defense. And these are all just going to be integers. You can go crazy. Everything you need to know about your item, you can put in this, whether it's what type of item, if it's a consumable, or if it's equipment, or a key item, or something. You can put a lot of stuff in this to be used. I'm just going to put this so that we can see it in our items as we go. So go ahead and save that, and we can actually close this down now. The next thing I'm going to do is create my uh, blueprint for the actor component, and this is going to be our inventory component. So select actor component, naming this inventory component. Then let's open that up. The first thing I want to do inside of this is I'm actually going to create my map now. And to do that, I'm going to go to variables, and I'm going to call this inventory map. And this is going to be that item structure type. Now to turn this into a map, we're going to go over to our details panel, and under variable type, we're going to select map. And we want this value type to be integer. So the item structure is going to be the key, and it'll pull out whatever integer is associated with that, which is in our case going to be the amount of items of that same item. So to begin with, let's create a new function here. And I'm going to call this update inventory. This update inventory needs to have an input. And that input we're going to call item. And this is going to be that item structure type. So when we call update inventory, we're going to pass it this item, and it's going to look for that item in the inventory. If it exists, we're going to add it to the existing inventory. And if not, it's going to create a new spot for this in our inventory map. So to start with, let's go ahead and pull out our inventory map here. Say get inventory map. And then I want to do a find. And what we're looking for is going to be this item. And again, now we're going to do a branch off of this. Go ahead and connect that. And if this finds it, we're going to add. So pull your inventory map back out, say get, and come off of this and say add. And make sure you select the map. And the thing we're going to add, if this already exists in our inventory, we're just going to add a count to this. So I'm going to come off of my value here, and I'm going to say add, and we're just going to add 1. If this is something that in your project you can pick up maybe 10 as one item, you could always create your variable here to pass in here as well, and that would be what's added to it. So this is just the way I'm doing it for this project. So we're going to, if this finds it in our inventory map, we're going to add 1 to that slot in the inventory map, and we need to connect this item here. Now, if this doesn't find it, we're still going to add. I'm going to copy and steal that for down here. We're still going to add this if it doesn't find it. So false, we're going to add, but we're just going to add 1 total. So it'll create a new spot inside of our inventory map for this, and we're just going to call it 1. And that'll still be this item as the key. And it's as simple as that to take our item that we're picking up and adding it to our inventory. If it exists, we're adding 1 more to it. And if not, we're just creating a new one with 1 being the integer. So real simple functionality. This is really what you would need to work in your game, and then pass it the item in any way that you need, whether it's picking up an item or just populating it through some sort of loop or function. The way I'm going to populate this is I'm going to create a function here, and I'm going to say populate inventory. And for this inventory, I'm going to use the item structure, and I'm going to create a data table. So I'm going to right click and just kind of start typing data table here. And we want to select data table under miscellaneous. And the row structure we want is going to be that item structure that we created. Hit OK on that. And I'm going to call this item. I want to call it item DT. Then let's open that up. And inside of this, I'm going to create a few items. And this uses the item structure that we set up. So it's an easy way to add a list of items that you can access or populate later in your game without having to do each one by hand. This first one, let's just call potion 0 and throw some random numbers in here. And I'm going to change this row name to potion 0 as well. And then I'm just going to duplicate this, and I'm going to do that by highlighting it and just Control D. And I want to duplicate it maybe 8 times. And each one of these names, I'm going to go give it another name or update the name. I'm not too worried about the item attributes here since we won't be actually seeing them for what we're showing here. But you could always, or when you do this, if you were doing it with the item data table, then you would want these to match whatever you want for your game or project. Just going to go ahead and do these real quick. And I'm actually going to remove these last two. We can do this with 6 just to kind of speed things along. Then we can go ahead and save that. And because we have our 7 items here that we're going to use. If we go back to our inventory component in the populate inventory function that we created, what we're going to do is we're going to do a loop because I just want to populate this so we can see random numbers and random items with different amounts of those items in each. So I'm going to come off of this and I'm going to do a for loop. And I'm just going to go from maybe 0 to 30. Then off in the loop body, I'm going to come off this. I'm going to say get table row names. And I want to set this to my item data table. Out of row names here, I want to come off and say random. Then off of this, I'm going to get data table row. And I'm just going to connect this to row name. And I'm also going to set this to my item data table just to give us a random here. And then if that row name is found, which it will be because it's coming from the same thing, I'm going to, this is out row is going to be our item. And this is going to go to another, go to our update inventory here. So this is going to grab an item from our data table. It's going to send that item to our update inventory. That item is going to come down into our inventory map and it's going to look to see if that exists already. If it does, it's going to add one more to that. And if it does not exist, it's going to create a new spot and add one. So again, real simple way to populate your inventory. Probably not ideal for most projects, but for what we're showing off, this will work. The next thing that I want to do is we actually need to open up our inventory here so that we can see it. To do that, I'm going to go into my third person character or whichever character you're going to use for your game. And I want to come over to the components. I'm going to click add and I'm going to find that inventory component that we just created. And I'm going to add that in here. That'll implement this inventory system. So now this can be used inside of this character. See, back to our inventory component. If we go to our event graph, on our begin play, I'm actually going to go ahead and populate this widget so we can see it. So I'm going to come off of begin play and say create a widget, and this is going to be our inventory widget. I'm going to go ahead and promote this return value to a variable, and I'm going to name this inventory widget just to get a reference for this if we use it later. And then from here, I'm going to say add to viewport. The next thing that I want to do in here, right before I add this to viewport, I'm actually going to call that populate inventory function just to give our inventory plenty of items, kind of random items, and we'll see different amounts of each item. The next thing we need to do is actually populate this inside of the widget itself. If I come out and I play this now, we see this widget coming into our viewport, but it's not getting any items. And that's because we haven't set up our widgets yet to be able to handle this. To start, I'm going to come into my inventory widget. And I'm going to jump over to graph. And in my event construct, I'm going to do a few things here. You might need to implement this different in your project. I'm going to just get that component, and then I'm going to get the inventory map from that, pass the keys to a for each loop, and then create each of our list items based off of that. So let's do that real quick. I'm going to say get player character. And then from that, I'm going to say get component by class. And this is going to be that inventory component. From here, I can go ahead and say inventory map and get that. From this map, I'm going to come up and I'm going to say keys. And this will give us an array of all of the keys, which are our items here. And for these, I want to come off of this and say for each loop, which will iterate through each of our keys, iterate through each of the items. And at each item, we want to create a list item widget, which is this one inside of our window. And we also want to set the item name and count. So for that, I'm going to come off of this and I'm going to say create widget. And this is going to be the list item, which is getting this widget is creating it and giving us a reference to it. And inside of this list item, we actually need a couple variables. We need to set the name and count. So actually, let's go back to our designer. We already have, if we go to item name and here, we have one already, but I want to do another one. I'm going to say create binding here. And inside of this binding, we need to get a reference to our item and then a name so that we can set that here. And to do that, I'm going to create a new variable here. I'm going to call it item. And this is going to be that item structure. Then I'm going to pull this item out, say get, and here I'm going to right click and split struct, and I'm going to plug this name into this, and it'll convert it for us. And that's all that we're going to do here. we'll set this item name based on, or in here based on the item that's getting that's in our inventory. So that'll populate this item, which will pass in and output the item name. If we go back to our designer here, we want to do the same thing for count. So I'm going to go create binding in the details panel under content, create binding. And for this, we're going to create another variable here. I'm going to call this count. This is just going to be an integer. Maybe just call it number. It's telling me that that already exists in here. I don't see it, but so go ahead and pull your variable out here, say get variable, and again, just plug that directly in. It'll convert for you. Oh, it's because I set this to count here. So I want to say rename, and I want to call this count text. And then I can come back in here and I can rename this variable to count. Okay, that's all we need to do inside the list item. We have a function to get the count and a function to get the name. And both of those we've created bindings to bind them to these text blocks. So then if we go back to our inventory widget here, we can pull off of this return value, which will give us access to all the things inside of the list item that we just created. For instance, I can pull off here and I can say set item. And we're going to set that item to this item, which will let us get a reference to the name or anything else you might need to use from your item in this, or that you want to show in your list item widget. I'm also going to pull off of this and I want to say set count. And then we need to set that count to the count that is associated with our inventory map. So I'm going to pull off of this inventory map and I'm going to say find. And we're going to find this item inside of our map. And if this exists in our item or in our map, if this item exists in our map, then it's going to output the number of items that match that. So we can plug that into count. The final thing we need to do in here is come off of our list item widget and we're going to say add child. Oh, sorry. We need to grab our list item here, pull out, say get list item, and here we'll say add child. And again, this list item is, if we go to the designer, it's this scroll view here. So we're adding a child to this scroll view, and that child is going to be the list item here. Probably should have named these something different so it doesn't get confusing. This should have been list item scroll box, but I'm just going to leave it like that for now. And the item that we want to add to that scroll view is going to be that list item. Let's clean this up a little bit. So this should populate our inventory. So let's go ahead and test it. If I come in and play, it does. So now we see random potions, and this number here is the quantity of that item. I'm going to go back into my list item and add a padding here so we can see the difference. So this looks a little better. So select either of these and just do a padding here. So now we can see our item. We have it randomly generating items and then the quantity. So this is telling me that there are 3 potion 5s, 7 potion 0s, and so on. So that's working. Again, let's go look at what's making this function and work. Again, we're populating just based off of random inside of our data table that we created here, and it's passing the item into our update item here. It's searching for that item inside of our inventory map, and if it exists, it's adding 1 to the quantity. If it doesn't exist, it's creating a new slot inside of that map, and then it's adding 1 to the quantity there. Real simple inventory system here. Obviously, you would want to implement the way you're picking up items differently, whether you're picking them up or trading for them. But that part is going to be unique to your game. But using maps for your inventory system is real simple. This is the functionality needed to add it. If you need to remove it, that's also just as easy. You could always um, call remove from maps right there. Again, you would pass it the map and that reference. So easy ways to remove it as well. Not going to do that in this tutorial, but this was just to show one, why you should be using maps. This is a lot easier than using an array to look for an item and then generating a number based off of some complex algorithm that you've got to come up with to keep track of the quantities as you pick up and use items. So this is just a real quick, simple tutorial on using maps for your inventory system. And that's going to do it for this episode. Today, we learned how to create an efficient inventory system using maps in Unreal Engine with blueprints. We set up an item data structure and used it as a key with an integer to track the quantity in our inventory. I hope you found this episode helpful and can use these techniques in your own project. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you enjoyed this content. As always, happy developing, and I'll see you in the next one.